Hi everybody, this is Anne. I'm always searching for inspiration to come up with pottery construction designs. For this video, I'll demonstrate how to create simple ruffled and faceted bowls using items that I found around the house, including spoons and bamboo skewers. For this first project, I'll be using a simple kitchen tablespoon. I rolled out a long slab 1/4 inch deep and ribbed it smooth on both sides. I placed a ruler along the long side of the slab and cut away the jagged part, leaving a straight line. I placed a piece of plastic wrap down over the pastry mat. I placed the slab right over the plastic along the edge of the pastry mat and work table. I created this template to use with this project. If you like the template, check out the link in the description section under the video. I lightly traced around the template with my needle tool. I spaced out the template so I can press the spoon down into the clay, and the top of the spoon will fit into every other scallop mark. I gently press the spoon down onto the clay to make an impression. Now don't cut all the way through. I can now cut the strip out along the template lines and remove the excess clay. I wet my fingers and smoothed and reinforced the top edge of the slab. This will soften the edges and help keep the indentions from cracking as the piece dries. I used my bevel cutter to cut a 45-degree angle along one of the short edges. I flipped the slab over and repeated this cut along the opposite short edge. I scored both of the beveled edges and slipped one of them. I stood the piece upright, curled the slab around, and attached the two short sides together. I gently worked the seam along the outside, trying not to destroy or distort the spoon decoration. I rolled a coil and worked that into the inner edge of the connection using the blunt end of a paintbrush and my finger to reinforce the joint. To create the bottom of the piece, I rolled out another 1/4 inch slab. I created a flower-shaped template which fits the bottom of the spoon cylinder we just made. I laid that down and cut that out of the slab. Again, I worked the edges smooth with my finger. I centered the flower-shaped slab on the banding wheel to make it easier to connect the two parts. I scored the outer edge of the scalloped slab and the bottom edge of the spoon cylinder, then slipped one of the edges. I laid the cylinder down so the bottom middle of each spoon lines up with the outer point of each scallop. Using my fingers along the inside to hold the scalloped edges in place, I used my other hand along the outside to press the slab that's between the spoons inward so they join the scallop along the depressed point. I worked my way around the entire piece, connecting both slabs. Then I used a paintbrush to smooth and seal the joint. I then used the brush along the inner edge to seal that joint too. I want the rest of the bowl to scallop, so I used 2 fingers along the inside of each spoon part and 2 fingers along the outer wall, pressing on the clay between each spoon to push the slab into the shape that I wanted. I continued this motion from the bottom part of the piece all the way to the top edge as I spun the piece around. I work gently at the top of the piece as the clay is still very wet and vulnerable to splitting. As the clay dries and stiffens, you can work the top edge more. It's a good idea to reinforce in between all the edges one more time before letting the piece dry so that you make sure you don't have any cracks. I'm doing this with my needle tool here. Now here's one I made earlier that's bone dry. I love that little flowered bottom. Along the top edge, as the clay stiffened up, I bent each of the little scalloped edges backward a bit to give the piece some movement. Here's another one I created earlier where I cut away the middle scallops and just left the spoon part. I did add little balls of clay in each crevice to eliminate cracking. This one looks like a crown to me. It would be pretty as a condiment bowl where the spoon would rest between the top scallops. Let's do another spoon bowl. This time let's see what it looks like to use a large cooking spoon. I again started by rolling a large 1/4 inch slab. I created a round template this time, using the bowls of the spoon as my guide. I laid it down on the clay and traced around the template, being sure to get all the edges just right. I positioned a piece of plastic wrap on the mat and placed the slab over it. I was going to do the spoon impression first before cutting the whole thing out, but changed my mind and cut it now. I smoothed and reinforced the edges of the clay with my wet finger. I replaced the template over the slab, sandwiched by another piece of plastic wrap, to get an idea of where to make the spoon impressions, but you can just use the scallops as your guide. I again moved the slab to the end of the table as the curved spoon handle needs clearance. Then I lightly pushed the spoon down into the clay. Now all I needed to do was slide the clay around to make all the rest of the spoon indentations. Remember not to press too hard or you'll go all the way through the slab. Now this is what it should look like, sort of a big flower. The side shown here will be the bottom of the bowl. To get ready for the molding, I replaced the plastic back over the slab. I'll mold the bowl in this 12-inch styrofoam half sphere that I got at my local craft store. I lifted and flipped the slab over and pushed it down into the mold. As the walls curl up, the clay will begin to buckle naturally along the scalloped edges that you cut. Using my fingers under the plastic on the bottom of the slab, I was able to reposition the clay so all of the resulting scallops were symmetrical, thus creating a nice ruffled bowl. Now here's the look I'm going for. And remember, don't take the bowl out of the mold until it is totally bone dry or it'll want to crack along those scallops. Now here's one I made earlier. Those spoons really provide a nice texture on the outside. I just love that. On the inside, you can see that as my clay started to stiffen, I used my finger in each of the tiny scallops, working the clay downward to invert them, which gives me this pattern. Now let's try another molded ruffle bowl, but this time using a jig. To make the jig, I used one of my glaze tops as a template and cut a circle from a piece of construction foam. I placed my trimming spinner in the center of the circle and divided the foam into eighths and then again into 16ths. I had these bamboo skewers that I purchased at the grocery store with sharpened ends. I poked the sticks on the side of the foam where I made each mark, trying to make them as straight as possible to radiate out from the center, but you don't have to be perfect. That'll be my jig. Again, I rolled out a 1/4 inch slab. I'll be using a 6-inch styrofoam half sphere to mold the bowl in, so I also used it as my template. I placed it down on the slab and cut around it. I placed a piece of plastic wrap under the slab and sandwiched it between another piece of plastic over top of it. I centered the jig down over the top of the clay. I flipped the whole thing over, keeping the clay over the center of the jig. Using my fingers, I gently began stretching the slab down over the bamboo sticks, even imprinting the circle of the construction foam into the clay. Be careful not to push too hard and cut through the clay. removed the clay from the jig and placed it over the styrofoam half sphere. I press the clay downward from the center gently. The indentations you made will begin to buckle. You don't have to push the clay all the way to the bottom of the mold. Leaving the clay just skimming the top of the mold will make a shallower bowl. Pushing the clay all the way to the bottom will create a taller bowl with deeper scallops. Now here's an example where I just skimmed the mold. You can see that the bowl has wider folds. Now here's a bowl that I made earlier where I did push the clay to the bottom of the mold for the taller walls and deeper scallops. On the bottom, you can see where the construction foam left its imprint for this lovely clam or flower-shaped bowl. Now here's another variation of the jig where I cut the bottom from a 12-inch styrofoam sphere and poked the bamboo sticks along the division lines. In this case, the curved foam center acts as your mold. I created this cute little scallop template for it. I cut the clay out and centered it over the styrofoam, then pushed the little scallops down over the bamboo sticks for this sort of sunflower look. After I finished these bowls, I started coming up with even more ideas for ruffled bowls. I bet you did too. I'll save these for another video. Let me know in the comments section which bowl was your favorite. Thanks to the newest members of our Little Street Pottery Research Facility team. If you'd like to join the team and earn a title, click on the Super Thanks button or the link to buy me a coffee. It also really helps us out if you hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. See you next time in the studio.